Welcome back to the Heart and Science of Creative Leadership podcast. We've got a great conversation that we had with Bob Feldman. And many of you may know that name. And if you do, he probably doesn't need much introduction. So we had an amazing big agency experience, went inside to what some people would call a dream job at DreamWorks back in the day, then started his entrepreneurial journey and is now an investor and advisor. So he has seen the industry in lots of different ways. And he has come into the industry, as an employee, as a leader, as a, sort of an investor now. And so he's looked at it a lot of different ways. I think one of the things, and Aarti, I'd love to get your perspective on this. I think because of the width and breadth of his experience, I think he is really clear on what worked for him. And I hope that we can that we pull through the conversation, the important things that he found in his experience that worked for him. And one thing that really struck me is about mentorship and getting younger people on teams the opportunity to lead. And we had an interesting conversation about this sort of being able to lead and challenge versus serve and respond.
When I lived in LA for a few years, and during that time, I met with Bob several times, and I got a real sense for his thinking. And what I am most impressed about with Bob is that he built truly a management consultancy communications firm, which is very, very difficult to do. And I've seen, or at least I've talked to many founders with that vision, but have not been able to really execute on it. So not only did he build really this a high strategy firm, but then he navigated that through an acquisition with, many people have probably heard of Olson & Gage, which is now ICF, which, Olson & Gage was not a high strategy agency. It was very much, and apologies for my friends at Olson, it was a bit more of a tactical, more traditional shop. And yet that was a relatively successful kind of merger of those two. And then, of course, they went on to have another acquisition by ICF. So again, not to get too much into like the weeds of who bought who, but I think that was really important because not only did he build this high strategy firm, but then he navigated it through two acquisitions and really, I think, kept the spirit and the vision of that agency. He was able to protect that.
Yeah. And then absolutely. And then the point about with Pulse Point is that he did it with a partner. So that theme comes up again of picking the right partner and how that gets picked. But he also now as an investor, he is really bullish on that management consulting, high strategy, low tactic firm and the investment strategies that he's making moving forward. So I think it's a really exciting conversation. I think there's a lot of things that everybody can learn. So hope you enjoy our conversation that we have with Bob Feldman. Bob, we're certainly glad you're here. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you guys. Thanks for having me.
I just want to jump in. A lot of folks know your journey and we can see your background and resume in the show notes. You founded a firm 2007, I think, early 2010. You founded a firm with Jeff Hunt, Pulse Point, and you guys had some great success and then ultimately sold and exited that firm. So if you could go back to 2010, kind of in roughly the middle of that time of the independence of Pulse Point, and what you were doing and what you were excelling at. Now you're an investor in 2024. Is what you're seeing the marketplace doing and what you're investing in right now, is what Pulse Point was doing then as relevant as what you're investing in and looking at today with FHS and the partnership that you're in from an investment standpoint?
The answer is yes. The qualifier to that is the nature of the work might be different, but let me explain that. The core strategy when we founded Pulse Point Group was to be a communications management consulting firm. Our target audience, if you will, our target client was the C-suite. So we wanted to be and define the firm as high value niche strategy. I used to take some pride, and I don't say this to be disrespectful, that if people asked about, can we meet some of your media relations people? I said, we don't have any media relations. That's just not what we did, So part of any successful strategy is not defining what you're going to do. A big part of defining a successful strategy is what you're not going to do. So we knew we were going to stay at the high end of the market. And that led us to, strategic counsel on big issues for clients, including a lot of crisis work that Jeff is, probably the best in the business on. We did a lot of organizational design work and kind of core corporate communication strategy work. If you ask me, would I start a business like that today? Absolutely. Now, we started the firm in 2007, 2008. We were one of the early ones, certainly not the only, but one of the early ones having a pretty good specialization in kind of digital technologies and communications. Well, I mean, it's a very different world today, 17
What's
years
not
later.
Digital now?
Right.
Everything's digital now.
Right, totally. So yes, I'd still be doing it, but it obviously would be a very different profile of the kind of offerings than it was 17 years ago. But I think the core strategy of being high value C-suite is a really good place to be.
So I'm going to chime in here for a minute because I do want to take our listeners back for just a moment. Bob, I guess, you've worn so many hats in our industry. I remember when you were the big agency guy, right, at WPP, even Omnicom before that, right? Then you were the DreamWorks guy, like what some would consider a dream job, pun not intended or intended, I'm not sure. What can you tell us about that aha moment, that inflection moment at DreamWorks when you thought, what? There is an opportunity. I want to become an entrepreneur. I want to build something, and not only build something, but build something different, right? Being kind of offering this sort of high-end strategy. I've seen, some agencies have done that and they've succeeded. Most at some point they have to go into tactics. So tell me a little bit more about that aha moment, that the beginning of that, the beginning of the idea for Pulse Point.
Okay, so first I have to say, I just feel obligated. I have to say, I started my career at Burson-Marsteller. I was there for 10 years. I Ketchum a long time. I was there like almost 10 years. So when you kind of described it, I worked at all these different places. I feel like I moved around a lot, but it's only the consequence of age that you can be at all of these places and still be at those places for like a long time. So that's kind of how we got where we are. The aha moment, really, really great question. So I'm not sure it was an epiphany on any particular day, but I will say the DreamWorks experience, just for context. So I'd been running GCI for about 8 years. About a year prior, we had sold to those are rather generous. Ed Meyer was the chairman CEO of Gray, sold Gray to WPP and Martin Sorrell. And frankly, for the year I remained, it was actually a very positive relationship. So, I only had good things to say about that. But out of the blue, my good friend and now business partner, Bill Heyman, called and asked if I wanted to meet with Jeffrey Katzenberg. And because DreamWorks Animation was spinning out and going public, and that required a management structure. And, as any agency CEO or any business leader would do, if you have an opportunity to meet with the CEO of a large company, much less somebody with Jeffrey's reputation, you're going to do it. But, once you open a door, sometimes it takes a lot to not walk through the door. It was very appealing. Long story short, obviously made the move with my family to Los Angeles. Really, really enjoyed it. It was a great time. Learned a lot. It was great. First time on the client side because I'd been at Burson, Ketchum, and at Gray. I will say, though, I remember any number of times when I was watching the animators sit in their offices or in creative meetings coming up with ideas for the movies and then animating the movies. And I remember thinking, these are the people making the product, right? I was, in effect, overhead. I was staff. Now, again, I want to be very respectful to everybody who's in corporate staff positions. But having grown up and spent so many times in the agency world, to me, one of the appealing things about being in the agency world is you are the product. And I don't mean just like me individually, but if you run an organization, the organization is the product. You're selling your collective wisdom and experience and capacity to help clients move their business forward. You're not overhead. You are the product. That's the business, I grew up in that and I really, really enjoyed that. So when I was at DreamWorks, I wanted to start making the movies, as opposed to, now the problem with that is I'm no animator. My creative skills are weak at best. So I found it a little bit frustrating that it was kind of in effect, a staff I knew what I was getting into when, I mean, obviously taking a job at corporate communications, corporate marketing at a company, you know what you're doing. But I will say that did enter my mind. And so when I started thinking about at some point moving back into kind of the consulting world, what would it be? And I could be wrong, and maybe we'll have a conversation about this. I think if you're starting, you've got to pick a niche. You can't just be, I'm just going to have a general firm. I guess you could do that, have a general PR firm or something. Mm-hmm. But it does not sound to me like a particularly compelling strategy. To me, you've got to take a look out in the marketplace and figure out where is there a need, there's a niche that you can kind of carve out, if not for yourself, that doesn't have 50 competitors, and then develop strategies to go after that niche. And that was what was appealing to me, and that's how we wound up kind of focusing PulsePoint.
So is that a chicken or egg? So just a second, chicken or egg, Bob? Is that you decided I want to be an entrepreneur, and then you found the niche, or you found a need in a niche, and then said I can best deliver that on my own as an entrepreneur, in a partnership on my own?
Yeah, really, really good. It's probably I want to start my own thing. I guess also, and part of that was maybe driven because, I had been in these large firms and so forth. So I really want to go back and do another large, I thought the idea of doing something entrepreneurial was really appealing. And we'll talk about this. I think the opportunities for entrepreneurs today are greater than they've ever been. And they were pretty darn good 10 years ago or whatever, So I think it was the entrepreneur itch that then led to, okay, let's figure out you could kind of create a bit of a Venn diagram of, what are the marketplace needs, where it's my expertise, where is my passion, and, you start looking for overlapping circles.
So I want to talk a little bit about the macro environment in which you launched, right? So it was 2008, correct? I don't know if it was before or after Lehman Brothers, but, that was the great crash of 2008. And did you, and most of that started in 2007, right? So and I think this is relevant to people listening today because the days of 2% interest rates, right? I mean, we're in a different financial environment than we were even 3 years ago. What gave you the confidence knowing that our financial system was in peril to go out and launch your own agency in 2008?
Yeah, well, to be candid, I really made the decision and started the firm this is before Jeff joined in 2007. So it predated the crisis. I originally started it was for only about 12 months as Feldman and Partners. And then when Jeff left, Jeff succeeded me at GC. Jeff and I have a long history together, been friends forever. We were at Burson. I hired him at Burson-Marsteller out of the University of Texas, God knows how many years ago. He came into GCI through an acquisition we did of Reed Poland in Texas. When I left GCI, Jeff succeeded me. After I was gone, after some period of time, WP decided to merge Conan Wolf and GCI. GCI Health remains to this day independent, but GCI, the core agency, merged with Conan Wolf. And I think it was soon after that Jeff decided to leave. And so he came in as a partner at Reed Poland, and GCI acquired Reed Poland. So that got Jeff and me back together again, so to speak. And then when I left to go to DreamWorks, Jeff took over from me as the CEO at GCI Group. And then when I started PulsePoint, I actually started it, this is now 2007, as Feldman and Partners. And then a year later, when Jeff decided to leave the integrated Conan Wolf GCI firm, and Reed Poland was there, we put the whole thing together. So that was 2008. So to your point, Aarti, that was right at the heart of the financial crisis. I will say this. I think the time to start a business can be equally compelling and equally good in a good economy or a bad economy. In a good, at the risk of oversimplifying, in a good economy, people are spending, people are feeling confident. There's an opportunity. In a bad economy, the big consulting firms suddenly seem very expensive. And I think if you start a business that is a high value business, but frankly just doesn't cost as much as the large firms and delivers a better product, I think there's big upside. And for what it's worth, I never sold on price, because I always felt like if you can deliver, I have a lot of respect for the large agencies, but the large agencies kind of their business model requires large clients. And what means large just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So you're talking multi-million dollar clients are really kind of the heart and soul of those firms. Not every client for every need wants to necessarily spend $5 million. But so the senior people in the large firms disproportionately have to be responsible for generating and managing large. I mean, it is what it is. I'm not saying that as a criticism. I did it. I have a lot of respect for it. But I think if you create a high value niche business where senior people can be deeply involved with the clients, that's what clients want, you know? And if you're starting your own firm and a client has, you know, just to pull a number out, a $500,000 budget for strategy work, right? I mean, look, if you're starting your own business, that's a great client, right? Now, I don't know, maybe if you're in a really large firm, that's a good start, right? It's just a slightly different mindset. So I think the opportunity for entrepreneurs, even in a lousy environment, is still very, very positive.
But it forces that crystallization of niche. It forces you to be even nichier.
I was going to say something that's kind of funny, it's a little tangential, but my wife started a company called One Kings Lane.
Yes.
She started it in 2000. She started in 2008 in the middle of an economic crisis, right? And they did very, very well. So I think there are lots of startups that actually start up in those difficult environments. Sometimes it's by strategy, sometimes it's by circumstance. You know, restructurings of corporations sometimes, you know, lead people to start their own things, and people sometimes can become very successful.
To the point that Bill just made, and yeah, and of course, you know, One Kings Lane, niche market, right? And to Bill's point, you know, when it's in a downtime, you know, you're sort of forced to find that niche. The number of agencies that popped up in the last 10 years, right? Because people at agencies were noticing that the founders, the principals at their firms are turning away $15K, $20K pieces of business because that was too small, right? For the heydays of 2015, 2016, that was too small for a lot of agencies. You had staff sitting there saying, "Hey, I could take that account if I just started my own thing." You know, so they didn't necessarily have a niche or a focus or a vision, just that there was a lot of scraps that the larger agencies were throwing aside that they knew that they could run out and take.
Yeah, look, I think you guys may have the research on this. I don't know what the numbers are, but I have the impression that in the last 5 years, the pace of new business, of startups in our field, in the communications field, is actually greater than it may have ever been. And that's in a good economy. But I think there is just enormous opportunity for people to do their own thing. And I do sense that there is a growing appreciation of the unique value that really large firms can deliver. But the flip side of that is a unique appreciation for where it's appropriate to go to niche firms. And so you're seeing, I think, even niche firms, what used to be, if you think of look at FGS, for example, or any of the, particularly in the financial M&A space, a lot of these used to be niche in the U.S. only. Now they've become global. Look at, Brunswick, I think, has done very, very well. Okay. Used to be thought of as much more as a smaller niche firm, but I think these firms that are being recognized for having deep expertise that's, I'm going to say, narrow. And I say that, I want to be generous. I'm not saying it's too narrow, but they're not just trying to be everything to everybody, right? They're doing really well and growing and now becoming, in effect, global boutiques. So I think, the world in our business has been changing for the last, certainly at least 5 years.
I think you are seeing a lot of these startups. And one of the themes that's coming through in more of these conversations, and I'd love your perspective, is this distinction between entrepreneurs that are starting performance-based businesses versus those that are starting lifestyle businesses. And so the definitions are that is a principal, maybe a partner, pay themselves $300,000 to $600,000, grab a basket of clients, service the hell out of them, maybe 5 to 12 employees, and build a really fabulous lifestyle. All the trappings that you would have, versus others that are kind of going into it for performance and to grow, maybe exit. That's getting harder and harder for a lot more people. So when we see a lot of startups, I'm seeing more people that are starting up to say, I can provide myself with a really amazing lifestyle, still do great work, still be focused on growth, but without all of the burdens of a performance firm? Does that resonate with you? And do you see any of that? And or do you think that if you're not over in the performance camp, that's really just sort of more of a hobby business?
Well, I definitely see it. I mean, the language I've used in the past, I like the performance, is lifestyle versus kind of an institutional business, meaning you want to create something that has lasting value that, you can monetize at some point, right? I see it a lot. There's no right approach because it's an incredibly personal decision. Look, if you could have a lifestyle business, make a very good living for X number of years and not have to deal with a lot of the issues that you would deal with if you want to build a company to sell, God bless. The one thing, though, I kind of advise people is it's not as simple as it sounds, because if you want to have, in the example you just gave, Bill, you'd have like 5 or 7 or whatever employees, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Any business, any professional service firm, and certainly in our field, and I don't care if it's a performance firm or a lifestyle firm, you're only as good as your talent, right? I mean,
Yes.
It's kind of a cliche, but it's true. Well, if you want great talent, you need to provide those people an opportunity to grow and build their careers. Otherwise, they're going to be with you for 2 years and get out of there because they're going to say, wait a minute, this is a lifestyle business. You're making yourself really wealthy. You're not providing me career growth opportunities because you don't want to grow beyond 5 people. So I'm getting the hell out of here. Okay. And if that's the business that you want to manage, that's okay. But that's not so simple. For what it's worth, that's not all that appealing to me, not just as an investor. It's not even appealing to me personally, although I get that some people like that. Because to me, a lot of the fulfillment that I think we get out of this career is identifying, recruiting, and developing talent and watching them grow, let them take on more responsibility, and kind of the joy and reward that you get from seeing the organization grow. So you have to grow in order to attract people. And then if you get the people that you want and they leave, you need to replace them and then grow from that base. So I'm not sure the growth isn't a choice. I think you have to grow.
Yeah. Oh, I
right?
agree.
So on the institutional or the performance side, I mean, I don't think it's, at the end of the day, it's really that different. I mean, it's on the lifestyle, if you want to be kind of a freelancer, maybe with 1 or 2 people part-time who help you out, that's one thing. But if you're trying to build a 5 to 7 person, honestly, if you're going to have 5 to 7, you may as well have 10 or 15. If you're going to have 10 or 15, you may as well have 25. You may as well have 100. I mean, it requires some new skills and so forth. But I think the reward that comes from that, look, if you start your own firm, you're going to be hustling all the time. You have to always look for new business. You always have to look for people. You have to maintain and build a culture that retains those people and lets them. It's all the stuff that we all kind of know. So why not do that? Build it in a way where there's depth of management talent. You have ongoing clients who are passionate about the work you deliver. And trust me, there'll be people out there who want to buy your firm. There has been a strong appetite for acquisitions for decades. There will continue to be a strong appetite for acquisitions. You have to deliver high growth. You have to deliver strong margins. You have to have recurring revenue. You have to have clients. I mean, there's a checklist of things you need to do right. But if you do that, trust me, you can make a lot of money selling your company.
So when you launched Pulse Point in 2008, you sold to Olson & Gage. At the time, they were Olson. Now it's ICF. By 2014, that's 6 years, right? So that was a relatively quick turnaround. Yeah. Did you set out to sell that in less than 10 years?
Yeah. So Jeff Hunt and I knew that we wanted to sell the business at some point. And so from day one, we created an equity participation plan for every employee. So anybody who worked with us had equity in the company or phantom equity in the company. And they knew that at some point we were going to be selling the business. And so we thought it was really important to have everybody aligned in terms of why we were driving the business so much, why profit was important, and all these kinds of things. We did not know what the timeline was going to be. One thing that I think is interesting is I had been on the board of Ketchum when we sold to Omnicom, and Ketchum was represented by a firm called Ad Media, which has since been acquired by a company called GP Bullhound, which is an investment bank based in the UK, but also here in the US. They represent, Ad Media used to, and now GP Bullhound, lots of advertising, marketing, communications agencies, right? I got to know those guys as a result of the Ketchum deal. When I started my own firm, I reached out to them, and like once a year, I'd have a cup of coffee with them just to let them know how we were doing, right? It was to build a relationship. I wasn't looking to sell the business after 1 or 2 or 3 years. It was just I didn't want to call them up after 7 or 8 years and just make it transactional. It's like you would do with any client. You want to build a relationship, not just a transaction. As a consequence of those conversations, one day they came to us and said, we represent a firm that might be interested in buying you, and that was Olson. Now, Olson, interestingly, was about to go on the block. They were trying to sell the company. They met with us. We said, look, we'll meet. I mean, who knows? It was only, as you said, I think it was maybe even 5 years. We said, we'll meet with them. Who knows? We liked them a lot. They liked us. Their deal was, we think that our firm, because we were focused on the C-suite, we were dealing with CEOs very often. It was a high growth, high margin business, lots of digital capabilities. They thought we would add substantial value to Olson. So if Olson was worth X and we were worth Y, they thought we would add a little more than just the Y. It would add to their own value. So they came to us and said, look, we think you could be kind of the spear of the what's that expression? I never
tip of the spear. Tip of the spear.
Yeah, you could be the tip of the spear because you're the strategy guys. You work with C-suite. Blah 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 blah. So they had a good offer. I will say at the time what was a little unusual was it wasn't an earn-out situation. They said we think you're worth X and we'll pay X, which I think was really attractive because I used to do deals on earnouts because that was kind of a WPP and Omnicom model. I think they since now do some earnouts. Sometimes they don't do earnouts. The problem with earnouts, I'm getting off into a slight tangent here, but the problem with earnouts, I think, is if Aarti, you have a company and that I want to buy, and I think you can add a lot of value, then if I bring you in, I want you to add your value to my whole company. But earnouts force you to stay in your little box to make your numbers so you can earn your earnout, right? And if I ask you, well, wait a minute, I want you to go to London and help us with a client we have and spend a week there and build the business, that's taking time away from you making your earnout. And there are ways to get around it, but trust me, it's complicated, it's annoying. So I think just buying a company outright and then creating incentives down the road for people is the right way to do it. So anybody who's listening to this is thinking about selling a company, not a big fan of earnouts. In any case,
can I ask a follow-up on Olson? Because you said that you all were a high-end strategy agency, right? Olson is it's not that, right? Olson was your tactical, the shop that you brought in for a product launch. You wanted some sexy activation, and they were brilliant at that. I will say they racked up numerous awards over the years for that. Yeah. But how did you know that there was going to be alignment between priorities between an agency that you'd built and an Olson?
Well, I guess the short answer is you don't know. You make a leap of faith. You spend a lot of time with them. You try to understand where you fit. We, I think, felt that we were in a good spot because they were probably giving us a little bit more credit and respect than we deserved. I mean, they kept on putting us at the front, this tip of the spear. You guys are the strategy. They weren't trying to integrate us into the tactical shop. I mean, Pulse Point would remain Pulse Point as the strategy firm within the larger entity. So they gave us a lot of kind of space, latitude. They were very supportive. And, we, jumped into the pool. I mean, but the truth is you never know. I mean, you just don't know for sure until you get in. So, the more you can know the people you're getting into bed with, at the risk of bad metaphor, the better off you're going to be.
Did you, when you guys were making that decision and you were on the brink of making the move, did you go back to your employees at Pulse Point and solicit feedback, or was this the two of you made the call and guess what, kids, here's what the future is going to look like? Or how does that work out when you've got a team around alignment and around equity, while obviously they had phantom shares? How do you play that out?
I think one of the benefits, or one of the realities of a smaller firm as opposed to a large agency is the intimacy with which the founders, the principals, their relationship with the staff, you know? So there was a lot of trust in Jeff and me. Also, over time, Paul Walker also joined as a partner. I think there was a lot of trust in us. So the conversations with Olson were really primarily Paul, Jeff, and me. But before any deal was done, we had the Olson folks come into our offices and meet with folks. I mean, they wanted to do that as much as we wanted them to do it, right? They want to know what they're buying, and kind of just do a litmus test and get to know each other a little bit. But the truth is, at the end of the day, it was our job to identify whether or not this was a good situation for us and for our staff. And, for what it's worth, Bill, I mean, the situation was even more complicated because Olson was clear to us that once we joined forces, Olson was then going to sell to somebody else. It wasn't known yet if it was ICF Next. So typically, when you say we're going to sell to a company, let's say Olson, you say to people, oh, they're going to be great. We're going to be working together. It's going to be the great,
Yeah.
Well, we kind of said that, but we also said, look, a year from now, we don't know who's buying these people and what that world is going to be like. So the leap of faith we're asking you to make with us is we believe it's going to be all good. Okay. And there's some financial upside to both steps in that process. And you guys, meaning your staff, the staff, are super talented. I mean, we were really obsessive about hiring exceptional people. And, at the end of the day, we said, look, if this doesn't work out, everyone here could have probably 3 job offers in the next 2 weeks. So, the risk is relatively low, right?
Yeah.
So that was going to be my question is, did you know that Olson's plan was to sell relatively quickly? And it sounds like you did, obviously. But for your staff, they had phantom equity, right, for the sale to Olson. Was there also an upside for them for the second bite of that apple?
Yes, but that was kind of a different model. So we created a program in which we said a percentage of the sale of the company would be set aside for the employees. And from the day we started the program, we had some sort of formula where we awarded points. So, you might get 10,000 points or 5,000, whatever. When you're doing that, you have no idea what the points are worth because you don't know when anybody's going to pay for the company. So there's a leap of faith there, too, that somebody's going to buy it, that these points are actually going to be worth something. But we did that whole thing. So when the company was sold, everybody got something. I mean, everybody got different amounts depending upon how long you were with the firm, your level of seniority, and so forth. Once we became part of, not Olson, but ICF, once Olson sold to ICF then put their own incentive program in place for more senior people. It wasn't like everybody. I shouldn't say it wasn't everybody. I should think about that. I mean, they have a number of programs that let people participate in the growth of the company. So I don't want to say there was no incentives, but it was kind of what you would typically find in a progressive thinking company. But the more senior people, as is typical, had larger incentives, but that was separate from that original program. The one thing I also just wanted to add was one of the things that was very fortuitous, I guess, for us is when Olson was thinking about selling and they were looking at ICF and a couple of other companies, they involved Jeff and me quite actively in those conversations. I mean, I remember we spent 2 days out in Malibu with some of the Olson people, just spending all that time talking about the options, the benefits, the upside downside of each of those eventualities. And that, that's not necessarily typical for a firm that's acquired. So we really appreciated the spirit, the attitude, and the relationship that the Olson folks offered us. It started with a guy named J.P. Partilla, who's still in the business,
Mm-hmm.
and a number of people who work for J.P. as well.
Yeah. So rewind for a bit. You and Jeff obviously had that shared experience of the big firm. Feldman Partners, you guys come together. Did you know that it was going to work with him as a partner? How do you guys figure that out? We've had a couple of conversations with owners that have been, hell no, I'll never work with a partner. We've had others that said the only reason I'm entrepreneur is because I found the right partner and there was the right fit. So, and I'm sure we will talk to Jeff down the road as well. Talk a little bit about that discernment around choice of partner and partnership and who does what and what are you seeing around partnerships that work, and then use your own experience.
Well, I'll tell you, first of all, I was very lucky. I'll tell you what I'm seeing generally, but I was very lucky. Jeff and I have been friends since. So when I was, I don't know, probably like 24 years old or something at Burson-Marsteller, a client of mine, a big client at Burson-Marstellers at the time for years. In fact, the largest client for a number of years was Owens Corning Fiberglass, the Toledo-based insulation manufacturing company.
One of those really sexy industries. It's hugely sexy industry.
Well, I'll tell you, we helped make this old house in Bob Vila famous. So what do you think about that? But that's a whole other story. In any case, but because they did a lot of work in the home building industry, we did for our client work at the National Association of Home Builders show, and we wanted to do an overnight survey of home builders as a kind of a read on the economy. So I needed people who could walk. This is before PowerPoint, much less iPhones, right? So we needed people who could walk the floor of the Astrodome where the conference was held and interview home builders. So I called up the University of Texas PRSSA chapter and said, we need kids who could do this. So of course the president of the chapter was Jeff Hunt. So that's how Jeff and I met. And so we worked together when he was still a student. And then when he graduated, I hired him at Burson, and then he went on to do amazing things at Burson. He lived all over the world and, was vice chairman of the company and so forth. Jeff and I knew each other really, really well. Another person I hired at Burson was Rob Flaherty, who I'm sure you know. Rob was chairman CEO of Ketchum. A long time ago, and I still have it somewhere in one of my drawers here, I have a business plan where Rob, Jeff, and I were going to leave Burson-Marsteller and start our own agency. And I literally still have the plan, and we kind of talk about it all the time. And, it's kind of fun. But I can't speak for them, but I babied out. I was married. I just had a baby. And the idea of, going from making a, halfway decent salary to God knows what, I was a baby. And we just never kind of pulled the trigger. My point, though, to go back to the question is Jeff and I have known each other. We're friends for a long, long time. So our confidence in one another, our ability to work together was kind of a given. It was smooth from day one, never had any issues, no issues whatsoever. And I don't take that for granted. Jeff's a great guy, and the ability to kind of do that together, it's not a given. Now, if I kind of fast forward to like what I'm doing now, where we're investing in firms, and believe me, I've had conversations with founders who, sometimes say, well, I want to start a firm, but I really don't want to do it alone. I want a partner. I need somebody to talk to. There's no one right way to do it. It's not that you should always have a partner or do it solo. It's whatever works for you. What I would say, though, is if you're going to get a partner, man, you got to spend a lot of time and really know who that person is and have that kind of relationship. I've seen this thing go south, and it's ugly, and it's really bad for the business. It's just, and it could be usually can be avoided. So it's not just making sure you really get along and all that kind of stuff, but it's making sure you understand the value that each partner brings. And, if the four of us started an agency tomorrow and you guys were geniuses in two fields, and I don't know, and I like to, I was okay at what I did, but, I knew a lot of people, and I like to run the business or whatever. What might happen is after 6 months or a year, I might feel like I'm not adding as much value as you, or you may feel like you're not adding as much as you want, and whatever. So understanding the value equation and making sure it's roughly equal. Jeff and I always said, look, we're going to have months or quarters or, I drove more new business and months and quarters where Jeff drove. We never even really paid attention to that because we kind of knew it balanced out. That's kind of what you want. You don't want to be tracking numbers for your partners. I mean, maybe if you have a lot of partners and you've got compensation committee to look at it, it's one thing. But by and large, you want a partner, you really, really need to know them and know the value proposition and be aligned on your strategy. And that just takes a lot of time.
Well, does the front of the house, back of the house strategy work? Where partner A is going to go make rain and the other one is going to stay behind and make sure everybody's bills gets paid? Or does that create inequity over time?
I think it could work, but not if the shares are equal.
Yeah.
I mean, I can hire somebody to run the business.
Okay.
I don't. Okay. What's much harder to find is somebody who knows how to go out and not just, bring in business. It's how to be a trusted advisor to senior clients, how to lead teams, how to inspire people, how to make them want to be the next chief executive or what, what I mean? There's a lot that goes into being, the CEO or, a managing partner. So if you bring somebody in whose expertise is kind of the operational running the business so they could deal with talent management and HR issues and operational issues and finance, it's hugely important. So I don't want to minimize that, but that's not a 50, for me at least, that's not, if you and I were going to start a business and that operational skill was mine and your skill was bringing the business, you should get more than 50%.
By the way, Bob, I'm just going back to what you said about PRSSA. I've had many of these chapters ask me over the years, like, how come we can't get people to get involved? What's our value proposition? And I just think that the anecdote you just said about Jeff, that's the best plug for PRSSA that I've ever heard. So if there's any college kids out here listening, that is a reason to be involved in your local chapters. But I wanted to ask you again about the.
By the way, that experience was only probably about 44 years ago.
You know what? It's still relevant today, I bet.
Right. No, it is. I totally agree with you. Totally.
Yeah. Well, the networking and where do you find these partners? But I wanted to ask a little bit about, because, you and Jeff had very similar trajectories, right? In your careers, big agency, you went in-house. We're also seeing entrepreneurs start younger and younger. So do you think that it's necessary to do your rotation at the big, what are we at, Big Four now? And then maybe do like an in-house tour in order to be a successful entrepreneur in our business? Or do you think it's a necessary prerequisite?
Well, I suppose it depends on what your area of expertise is and what your focus is for the firm. If you're targeting the C-suite, I just don't know how, you can have 4 years at an agency, be in your mid-20s and be seen as a trusted advisor at the C-suite level. Now, having said that, I'll also, quickly say that I think once the world went digital, one thing that happened that I don't know that it ever happened before, ever, is that the people you were hiring into the companies had a skill set that was incredibly important that they had that the senior managers did not have. That's why, you started to hear 10 years ago or more, about reverse mentoring and so forth. So the skill set that people in their 20s, much less early 30s, bring to a firm or as a consultant to a company are substantially greater than they were, I don't know, let's say, when I was starting, okay? However, that has to also be placed in the context of business judgment and business strategy. And that's maybe where partners come in. Like, I don't know, if I was a 25-year-old, really, really smart person in terms of how to use digital strategy for shareholder returns, I probably would want to partner with somebody who had 10 more years, 15 more years experience, who understood the M&A shareholder world and the players and had relationships with the attorneys and the bankers. And together we might be powerful because that counselor combined with my, really strong kind of technical skills to deliver the value, that's really, I think, compelling because most people in their, the kind of the older trusted advisors don't have the same fluency that the younger professionals have for those skills. So I think that could be a powerful combination. And that's a way to think about partnerships.
So are you looking at just that high strategy, low tactic firm? Now, on the FHS investments, are you looking at tactical and where that younger person that has that unique digital or AI or fill in the blank skill set, not CEO counselor? So what are you investing in? Are you investing in some of those non-high tactic, low strategy folk as well?
Our mantra is strategy first.
Okay.
For us, where our focus is high value, it's C-suite. That's where it starts. Now, a couple of things about that. One is, I know this from our experience at PulsePoint. If you do strategy well, you will be forced to do some tactical work because your clients want you to do that. I mean, if you're telling the strategy, say, okay, fine. Why do I have to go someplace else to get this done? Do it. You know, I think most people think of McKinsey as a strategy firm. I think they're very good at strategy. McKinsey does a hell of a lot of tactical work as well within their field. That was kind of our kind of focus at PulsePoint. We started with strategy. That's how we wanted to define ourselves. That was who we were. But at the end of the day, we did a fair amount of tactical work, A, because clients want us to do it, and B, it actually was a very, very effective way to train junior staff to learn the business and to come up and take on more responsibility.
Can I asking a follow-up on that? And I think there's probably founders listening today who have some stellar, tacticians, right, at their agency. Do you think how do you train people from being tacticians, to being strategists?
Really, really, really good question. And what I'm wrestling with is, it's one of the things that frustrates me about the extent to which we work remotely now. And it's why I think a hybrid solution is at least the minimum of what ought to happen in any professional service firm. The financial services sector, for the most part, has gone back to the office virtually full time. When you look at, any of the big banks and so forth, they tend to do that. Yep. I think a lot of that is learned by osmosis. A lot of that is learned by showing up. I mean, if I think about all the times I spent, in the office, both in meetings as well as one-on-one, sitting down with people, having lunch with people, talking about the client work. I mean, a lot of what is taught is not taught in the classroom. It's client relationship. Grant, I hope he doesn't get upset with me for sharing this. Grant Toops, I hired Grant. I don't know if you guys must know Grant. Grant, is now, he's got a big job at Hill and Knowlton, soon to be Burson. He was like chief digital officer, or chief technology officer, I should say. But Grant worked with me for about 10 years or so when I started this firm. At the early days, Grant had just come out of USC. He graduated top of his class in the master's program. So he's a really bright guy, but he didn't really have that much experience, right? I used to have him just listen in on, I picked this up in LA because the Hollywood entertainment community does this all the time. I just have him listen in on all my calls.
Yeah.
Right? He just learned from hearing me talk to clients. And I try to get him involved in as many calls or meetings as I could. You just, you learn from that kind of experience. So how do you learn that? Your question, how do you learn that? How do you make that migration from tactical to strategy? I think it's just being intellectually curious. It's, being involved with as many things as you can with your boss and with other people. And you learn that. I'm sure there are classes about, how to be a great strategist and so forth, but a lot of it is learning a lot of it is self-confidence. A lot of it is the ability to sit in a room with clients and learn how to listen and not think you have to be the smartest person in the room. A lot of it is, if you know what's going on in the world, you know how to kind of integrate what's happening with that client, with what's happening around the world, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, one of the frames, and all that's true in my experience, but it's also labeling it. And I've used this lead and challenge versus serve and respond. We want you to develop as an individual, to lead and challenge your clients, not sit with your notepad, serve and respond. You want a press release with a side of fries. That's one thing. That's serve and respond. How do you lead and challenge the relationship?
You see, you're getting in, Bill, you and I think have talked about this before. I mean, the whole issue of talent management to me is a huge thing, because I think at the end of the day, and I tell this to the companies we've invested in, who you hire is more important than getting a client, because the people are going to last longer. They can have more damage. I mean, there are a whole host of reasons. You focus on talent before you focus on anything else. And, I think, your example of lead and challenge is exactly right. To me, one of the ways, I said you need self-confidence to do that, right? And one of the ways you get that confidence is to have enough time with your boss and other people where you genuinely believe they think you're a rock star, and that they have your back, and that they want you to go in that room and they want you to stand up there, and you're not taking a risk, and that if you don't do well, you're not going to be on probation the next day, So that's a very, very personal it's not a conversation. It's 100 conversations. It's lunches, it's coffees, it's sitting around. It's people. I'm a big believer in like real-time feedback. Like, I'd go to a new business presentation with some staff in the car on the way back. I would say to, it could be a junior person, a middle, it didn't matter. This is what you did great. Here are a couple of things I think you really need to kind of work on to get better. I'll help you, whatever it is. But if people, there's like a smell test. And when you're talking to them, your mouth may be moving, but what they're trying to figure out is the subtext. And the subtext is this guy getting on my case and he thinks I'm a loser and I'm going to get put on probation? Or does this guy really have my back and wants me to succeed and is my champion, right? That's kind of what they're trying to figure out. And as long as they feel like you're a champion for them and you have everything invested in their success, then they'll have more confidence. But that that kind of thing so you could teach the lead and challenge in the room, but the confidence that's required to assert yourself comes from 1,000 conversations. And it's the last thing I'll say is why so many junior people say when they get invited to a new business presentation, for example, or a client meeting and they have to present, they're more nervous about presenting in front of their boss and their boss's boss. And that's why you've got to create the sense of confidence that you completely trust them, so they're not freaked out that they're presenting in front of you and they can be their best.
And I think that what you're describing is psychological safety, right? And that has, moved really from like the fringes into the mainstream and become a priority for workplaces if they really want to foster creativity, risk taking, really encourage people to step up into leadership positions. And I think being a founder, you can both create an environment of psychological safety, but also really hinder that, right? Because when your boss doesn't have a boss, that scares people, right? Because there's only one person at the end of the day who's going to decide whether what you did, whether that risk was brave or whether it was foolish, right? And I think that's a challenge working at a smaller organization, or one where it's a founder-led organization versus having many more layers of leadership involved.
Yeah. One philosophy I always say, I'm a Libra, so I see a lot of things in gray. I weigh both sides. Everybody's got a perspective. But when it comes to talent who's working for you, an employee who's working for you, it's incredibly black and white. If they're working for you, you are 100% committed to their success. There is no ambiguity there. You've got to do that. Now, if they don't work out and you've got to let them go, then you have to let them go. But until that decision is made, you have to give them the confidence and the support necessary to succeed. Otherwise, you're not doing yourself any favor, much less that person.
And a lot of that has to do with the self-orientation of the leader, their ability to have self-awareness, because we've seen too many owners, founders that are sort of rooted in scarcity, rooted in fear, and that comes out in the shitty behavior they push downstream. And they're not recruiting talent, and therefore they cop out and say, well, we're just a lifestyle firm because I can't keep good talent. Because and a lot of that starts with them and their ability to know that it's me in that challenge. So we need to wrap up. But Bob, I'd love to ask you a question. It's a bigger one. Short question, but a bigger question. You've had this great career arc. You're doing great stuff now with the investment side. How are you defining success? How do you define success for yourself nowadays?
Interesting question. So as you know, I'm primarily doing two things professionally, I suppose. One is the investment FHS Capital Partners that I have with Bill Heyman and Don Spenner. And the other is I run the Dialogue Project at Duke University at the Business School. That's a program I started in 2019, and it's housed at Fuqua, the Business School at Duke. That's obviously totally pro bono. That is intended to make the world a better place. I mean, that's all about what role business can play to reduce polarization and improve civility in our society. And it's a huge issue. I'm actually going down to Fort Lauderdale in a couple of weeks with a council of chief legal officers. It's mostly general counsels and chief compliance officers for large companies. They're very concerned about workplace violence and incivility in 2024, given the climate we're in and the catalyst of a difficult political campaign season. They're not alone. We do work with SHRM, the Society of HR Management, same issue, and I've done work with Page on the same issue. So this issue of polarization, civility is a huge issue that isn't going away. In fact, it's unfortunately only getting worse. So, your question is how do I judge this? So I guess on the investment financial, the FHS Capital part, that's quite quantifiable. I mean, I think before I get to the numbers, I would say Bill, Don, and I are having a lot of fun, and we really enjoy working with rock star young talent to help them grow companies that could be really successful, and that ultimately, hopefully they make good money on the thing. But to be able to leave maybe a corporate job or an agency job or something and start your own thing and grow it. And, we can help them because we bought sold firms. We know people who can be helpful to them, all that kind of stuff. We find very rewarding. Financially, who knows? Hopefully you never know. Hopefully that's a good thing. We think it will be, but we'll see. Some great firms. Alethea Group, as you may know, Alethea is a disinformation information company founded by Lisa Kaplan. That's a great firm. Next Practice Group, Bob Pearson started. Bob and I used to work together for years. They're doing great. Drive Path Advisors, is a corporate financial firm run by Gordon Penoyer. They're doing unbelievably well. So, any number of firms I think that are good examples of this. In terms of the work at Duke and the Dialogue Project is hugely important to me because at this stage, Tom Martin, who you may know, Tom teaches at the College of Charleston. He used to be a CCO at FedEx and ITT Industries. He's been a big shot at Page forever. Really great guy. Tom is a guy who asked me a long time ago about legacy. It's one thing you have a career and you get to some certain point of your career, you probably made the money you're going to make, you've done well, blah, blah, blah. Now what? What are you giving back? And Tom's probably been the role model for a lot of us on that. And that's one of the inspirations for teaching at USC. And it certainly contributed to the work that actually led to, I got an award at Page, which triggered the Dialogue Project because I had to give a speech and I wound up talking about polarization, what business could do. And that led to research, which led to the idea that this thing shouldn't disappear. It should go on. So it became the Dialogue Project. So to me, it's, do I feel like, and can I point to tangible examples of where we're making progress? We're informing the business community to try to, the whole purpose is to educate and inspire business leaders to make a contribution, to do something to help improve the state of polarization in this country. From the Edelman research, it's, business is the most trusted institution. There are like 125 million people who are employees of companies. I think companies have an opportunity, if not an obligation, to help kind of train people about the kind of tools they need to use so that the kind of ways in which they find compromise and can listen to one another and be productive on Monday to Friday in the work environment is as relevant at night and on weekends as it is in the workforce. So, that's very rewarding, and it's got a lot of support by people at Duke and by a lot of companies. So, to me, at this stage of my arc, as it were, having that kind of impact is very fulfilling.
That's awesome. That's fabulous.
Yeah. Thank you, Bob. Your career is one of note. Have you gotten any lifetime achievement awards yet?
Well, my wife is going to give me one next Tuesday, I think, but I don't know.
Congratulations.
Well, I got a very nice award from Page.
Yeah, no, you're really one of the stars of our business, and you keep a low profile out there in LA, but it feels like you're do something. Sadly, I don't have any power to help make that happen anymore. But if I did,
hey, what are you talking about? You just put me on your podcast.
That's true.
Yeah, we're going to put you into the Heart and Science of Creative Leadership Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Every guest gets there, but it's all good.
Exactly.
Bob, thank you for this. Thank you for your time. This is super fabulous. Really appreciate the time and appreciate the conversation.
Great being with you guys. Thanks.
Wow, what a great conversation with Bob. And I think we both of us came into this knowing Bob, and it is really obvious that he's got a lot to say about a lot. And it is just really, as we reflect on it, I think there's a handful of things that I think really, really stood out to us. But Aarti, to get us started, what stood out to you in that conversation with Bob?
Oh my goodness, so much, because Bob always has a lot to say and a lot of insight to share, right? I thought it was really encouraging for any entrepreneurs out there listening, this idea that there is an opportunity in every economic climate, right? I mean, in fact, in some ways, in leaner times, you're forced to be a bit more focused rather than in boom times when you're just so busy taking on new business that you really don't have a ton of time to go inwards and really think about what you're building. So I thought that was a great point. The second point he made was about that really stood out to me was psychological safety. I am so glad that we are talking about that, especially in creative services, because that to me, I mean, we can talk all day about remote versus hybrid, but there was some really good research done by Future Forum, which was an offshoot of Salesforce. Sadly no longer exists. Future Forum, Salesforce does. But the point of that research was to show that the number one indicator for employee engagement, for creativity, for success was not where your employees were doing the work, but how they felt when they were doing the work. And did they feel safe asking a question, coming up with an idea that was unconventional? And while every organization will say that they are psychologically safe, that can really vary even within one organization, depending on who your manager is. So as an entrepreneur, being really knowing who your managers are and how your employees feel about working at your agency is really important to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in that creative space, and you said it, but I want to punctuate this, collaboration at its core is so much better with safety, with psychological safety, but also just with mutuality of trust. And I think if you're an owner and you're saying, wow, I wonder if I'm a psychologically safe leader, that is a great question for every entrepreneur, every owner to ask themselves first. Get feedback. But as you mentioned, also check with your managers and observe it in your managers. Don't just observe, are people getting their timesheets in and are they doing kind of the administrative, but use that lens is, does Sally have the ability to offer a unique perspective? It gets into sort of diverse and different voices as well, the ability to hear that. And one thing we talked about a little bit with Bob is that, there is a lot of fear in ownership and a lot of fear in entrepreneurism. And what looks like the lack of psychological safety could really just be the owner being scared to death about screwing things up and not getting people paid. So I think that thinking about sort of, am I running an environment that is healthy? Is a really, really wonderful insight. And Bob didn't necessarily go that deep on that, but I think he opened the door to have subsequent conversations around that topic.
Yeah, and I thought an example of that, right, was the transparency that he had as he was selling Pulse Point, right? So Pulse Point, he founded it in 2008, did its first sale in, I think it was 2014 is what he said, and he sold to Olson & Gage. And according to the conversation, right, he was really open to the phantom owners of the agency, many of his staff, about what that would look like. And of course, and at the end of the day, because Olson & Gage was very apparently transparent with Pulse Point, that this was going to be the first bite of an apple, right, and they were going to be selling again, and they didn't know to who. That there was a leap of faith that Bob had to ask his team to really trust him and Jeff to make not only a good decision for themselves, but for the whole for the whole agency. And I thought that was I think that level of transparency can be so critical for success, especially when you're dealing with a sale or any kind of inflection point like that.
Yeah, and amen. I think it's important. I hear it from owners that they see way more downside than upside often. Some, not all, is that I hear, I don't want to get blocked into a dead end. I don't want to get, committed to things I'm not committed to, are kind of the excuses. And I just think that's old, bad thinking. And so these guys were pretty cutting edge the way they thought about things.
And let's just take a minute to think about like what he built, right? Which is how difficult that is, right?
Yeah.
To build a traditional PR, and not to diminish this, right? Like not to diminish this, but building a traditional PR firm is one thing. Mm-hmm. It has its own challenges. But building a high strategy firm, that is very, very difficult to do. And Bill, I believe you've done that too, haven't you?
Yeah, we, obviously public strategies, that's what we were. And we used, and I've used language of, high strategy, low tactics in Kith that I built that was, if you want media relations people, or if you want sort of buttons and bows and widgets, that's not really what we do. We are C-suite advisors and counselors. And I think those types of firms, these high strategy, low tactics, in an age of AI where so many different GPTs can get good work done at that lower level, makes it even more of a premium, which marries back to psychological safety, because we're asking mid to junior level people on our team to step into the sunlight of wisdom, not necessarily the output of stuff, which is how we used to evaluate people. And if you don't feel safe to say, hey, governor, I'm not sure I would do that. If that doesn't feel safe, your whole business model is kind of creaky.
Well, and that was another good point that he made, right? If you're going to build a high strategy firm, what do you need? You need access to the C-suite.
Yeah.
And depending on where you are in your career journey, that kind of has to be earned a little bit, right? As Bob said, if you're 4 or 5 years out of school and you think a CEO is going to take you seriously enough to entrust you with sort of the strategy, and not to, I think there are examples of that. I do. I think it's just harder and more rare. But I think that's why Bob's traditional career trajectory sort of kind of enabled him to build the firm that he did, right? He did his tour at the big holding group agencies, having big jobs at those. He did his tour in-house. And by the time he was ready to build PulsePoint, he had sort of earned not only the credibility, but also the network as well to be able to build PulsePoint. So I thought that was a good point. And then also, building it with his partner, Jeff. And one of the things that stood out to me in the way that he and Jeff met, right, the serendipitous phone call from the Astrodome, was if you truly are looking to start your own agency and you want to do it with a partner, you almost have to have the same mindset as you would if you were a single person looking to get married, right? You kind of have to, every opportunity is an opportunity to, quote, meet the one, right? Mm-hmm. Who would have thought that this phone call to like a PRSSA chapter would be so fruitful for both Jeff and Bob down the road?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And my yes and to that is that much like in relational partnership picking, there's value in the wisdom of others and getting outside perspectives. Hey, what do you think? You go to your family and as you're thinking about that entrepreneurial journey, it's one thing to get, laser lock. Well, there's that really sharp person at that, University of Texas chapter, but it's valuable to get outside perspectives on that journey as well. And so I think we're seeing a big thematic in our conversations around partnership, partnering, the benefits, some weaknesses of it as well. So yeah, I think it's incredibly valuable to have some higher discernment on partnerships.
Yeah, I felt like some of these, like especially the piece about psychological safety, we got to it so close to the end that I feel like there was more to explore there. And the question that I think, and you started, Bill, the conversation with this question, is given how traditional Feldman's career trajectory and really sort of in some ways at the time PulsePoint was disruptive, right? But today, I don't know that it would be. The management consultancy piece a little bit, just because that is a tough nut to crack. And creative professional services. But he did make the point, right? Like if you're good enough at strategy, at some point you will be doing tactics, and how deep you go into that tactics is a question. But I just wonder if his blueprint would be applicable for today's marketplace.
Yeah. Well, I think it is, and I think it will be, and I think that's what I know. I've got a little bit of a peek into what they're investing in. That's who they're investing in, and they're investing in that, and it all fits together. And I'm curious your reaction to this. Is that in that we were talking about career paths for could someone be at a big firm 3, 4, 5 years, go out and launch their own thing, and would the C-suite take them seriously? As we were talking with Bob, I thought about this sort of the personal trainer and the divorce lawyer. I'm happy to trust a personal trainer that's in their 20s to help me do things because they're learning cutting edge and it's a relatively, customized niche experience. And I'm happy to do that because I can kind of see the result. And that's almost like social or digital or sort of this new innovative influencer strategy. I might trust that firm. But when I'm on the maybe brink of a divorce or writing a big will or estate or a big real estate transaction, I don't want someone that's just sort of figuring it out. I want someone that's been there, been around it, has some battle scars to advise me. And I think that's that distinction. Niche service personal trainer, CEOs and companies will maybe look at that from a different generation, but seasoned, bet the farm, crisis, big M&A, they want some folks that have been around the block. It's a little bit of a crass analogy, but I think it actually kind of an interesting way to think about it.
I think that's a brilliant analogy, and it resonated with me right away. With the only caveat, I remember sitting at an industry event and seeing someone from one of the banks on stage and saying, the playbook, the crisis playbook that we have relied on for decades, throwing it out the window. That does not apply in today's world.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I mean, you look at what's happening with the royal family, right? They've gotten away with editing photos for a really long time. And we've, as consumers of media, have gotten much better at discerning Photoshop and things that are little weird in pictures, and they got pushback on it. And so because of that, I wonder if that strategy of having, or that plan of having sort of the seasoned folks in the room, the downside to that is they may not be as savvy about how much the world has changed and is changing. Yeah. You look at some of the crises that happened in the last year. I think about Shein, right? And they really thought that if they just bring these influencers into the and just kind of feed them talking points, that nobody was going to watch that and say, BS meter, like this seems off, right? And so I wonder if that should still apply in today's world. And maybe we need to find an agency partnership where you have somebody from like a digital native and a more seasoned, crisis expert who's been around the block a few times. Maybe, I don't know if that exists, where you have those two personalities coming together.
I think it would be great. And, as a charter member of the middle-aged, gray-haired white guy club, I feel that pain. I mean, I feel that. I think that, as I will now go back to my fax machine and send a couple of faxes to reporters, two things that don't exist anymore, reporters and fax machines, there is still that, and I hope I'm not saying this from a self-serving perspective, there is still value in experience. The medium of which that gets delivered and being cognizant of today is critical. And I think any seasoned counselor keeps their eye on the big objective for the corporation, but they also watch the environment. I still think there's value in that. And I worry about unintentional footfalls of folks that aren't looking around those corners and been there, done that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, those watch outs are critical, especially when you're dealing with reputation. And I think the value, this is why maybe how many unicorns are out there that have that are seasoned, right? But are still like, people sometimes laugh when I tell them I'm on TikTok and I love TikTok, and they're like, oh, what are you like, learning dances? And I'm like, no, that is really where you can see around corners. The things that are being talked about on TikTok today which, and we'll see if it's still around by the time this airs, but are the things that the mainstream media are talking about a month or two. And the same way that Twitter was, right? I mean, those of us that were on Twitter, we knew COVID was going to be as bad as it was because we were following the epidemiologist directly, right? And I do think that there is value in a lot of these social channels, and this is why people are a little bit savvier and smarter than maybe in previous generations, because we've kind of taken like the middleman out a little bit, right? We're going directly to the source.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I think it's time will tell. I think to the conversation with Bob, he did it once, he did it twice. He's now investing in them. And obviously he believes that seasoned wisdom giving, let's not be ageist about this, but seasoned wisdom givers, the marketplace CEOs are still going to reward that positively. And I think that we're seeing that. I know one of their clients, one of their investments. And that's exactly what they're doing. And they're doing great. They're sort of fast movers. So it's a really rich conversation with Bob, a lot there to unpack. I'm glad we took some time to sort of deconstruct and think about a handful of key points from that. So thanks for joining us. We'll continue these great conversations with owners on the heart and science of creative leadership, where we're going to try to understand more milestones, methods, and mistakes. By the way, we didn't get many mistakes from Bob, but I don't know if Bob makes mistakes, but we will continue to keep learning from these owners. So thank you all very much for joining us.